Okay, we're having technical difficulties with the live today, which is weird because it's not Mercury retrograde or anything, I don't think. I'm gonna try to let Lyndsey back in again, and we're hoping it will work better this time. And if any of you are watching, let us know if you can hear us.
I can see you this time now too.
Yay! Okay. Hopefully
Yay!
there's also volume. We'll have to um whoever is joining, let us know if you can hear us because we're having problems with technology today, which is super weird.
Yeah, I can hear you fine on my end. So hopefully whatever was going on for Misty, it's all. So if anybody cannot hear us, just quickly, well, I guess they can't hear us if we're saying they can't hear us.
Yeah. Here, I'll do a comment.
Just give
Can
us a
you hear
thumbs up
us?
if you can hear us.
Okay,
Sounds good.
sounds
Yay!
good. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Let's start
All
over.
right,
Um,
sounds good.
I think we might end up going 5 minutes past since we're now starting 5 minutes late. So this month's topic is blind instincts or repressed instincts and how they affect sexuality and relationships. We're super excited to talk about this. And I missed Lyndsey last month, although I loved having Leanne on as a guest, so we're happy to be back together. So we'll quickly reintroduce ourselves and then we'll go right into the topic because there's so much to talk about blind instincts. So I'm Sam E Greenberg, a sexuality researcher, an Enneagram researcher, and I'm also an Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality and relationships mostly. And my doctoral research is on sexual desire and the Enneagram related to type and dominant instinct.
And my name is Lyndsey Fraser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist and IA accredited professional out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I have a small private practice where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram.
Okay, so Lyndsey, can you start us off with just like a general intro of this topic and what we're going to be talking about?
So many of you may or may not know what instincts are, but those of you that do know what the instincts are, your repressed instinct is the one that's in the third position, or the one that you don't really feel like is necessary or need, or not necessarily as aware of. And so after this, Sam's going to go into a brief description of that, but we're going to talk about today is just a little bit about how that repressed instinct influences and affects sexuality and our relationships. Because if we don't think it's important, and I think it's really interesting here, just even having Sam and I, she is dominant actually in my repressed instinct and just how that can influence and affect how you relate, interact, and engage with others in your life, and especially within the sexual realm. So it's the third position. So for instance, I am a 9 who has a social in the dominant position, self-preservation is in the second position, and sexual instinct is in my repressed or blind spot. And so today we're going to talk about how that one in the third spot affects how we show up. And just briefly, Sam is just going to go over reiterating sort of what instincts are as well.
Okay, so world's fastest overview. Really quickly, if you don't know just general information about instincts, we've done 2 episodes about this before. Episode 2 was just on instincts and stacking, and episode 4 was on instincts in the wild, meaning how instincts are related with our own lives. So you can reference both of those. You can also reference both of our Instagrams. We have like overviews of this. But super quickly, the self-preservation instinct, so those who are self-preservation instinct dominant, that has to do with maintaining the integrity of the self, of the body, of the home, of energy level, of your basic needs. And in evolution, the purpose of this was to stay alive. So self-preservation people, self-preservation dominant cavemen would be saying, you know, do we have enough food? Do we need to go hunting? Do we need to preserve food for the winter? You know, we need to make sure that our bodies have enough energy. That's self-preservation. I probably have to go even quicker. So social would be the community instinct, the community bonding instinct. And that has to do with where is your place in the group? What's you, like, are people happy with you? Are they unhappy with you? Is everyone in the group happy or unhappy? Do they need things? How do I relate to others in more of a group dynamic? And then one-on-one, it would be more to do with, are we bonded? Are we connected? And evolutionarily, this one was the tribal instinct. So in order to survive, we need to be cohesive as a tribe. And the cavemen with this dominant were really attentive to how's the tribe doing, basically. And then finally, the sexual instinct has to do with intensity, tension dynamics, passion, depth, not exactly bonding, but merging more so. And in evolution, this is the mating instinct. So the cavemen with sexual instinct dominant were making sure we're having enough sex, that we're having enough babies, that, you know, we're continuing the species. So all three have been really important throughout history, and they're all three equally important today, but we tend to have one where we leak a lot of energy, where we invest a lot of energy. And then, as Lyndsey said, we have one, you know, a middle one that's sort of balanced, and then we have a repressed one. And the repressed one is where our focus is today. That's where we're not putting enough energy to the instinct. So quickly, last thing on this before we jump into sex. A lot of people would want to know and have been asking us as we're promoting this live, how do I know what my blind instinct is? So that's actually easier to figure out than you think. How you can know is basically, of all those three things that I said, which one of them doesn't come as naturally, or if you can't answer that, which one, when you see other people doing it to excess, do you think it's silly? Do you think it's a waste of time? Do you think it's like ridiculous? Are you judging it? So in my case, I'm a self-preservation repressed 5. So when I see self-preservation dominant people being excessively attentive to how much energy they're expending, their home, their food, their needs for different resources, I'm like, well, that's boring. Like, that seems like a waste of time. So that's how you can tell what your repressed instinct is. And I think that's everything we wanted to cover for intro. But Lyndsey, did you want to say something about the group?
Yeah, I had two things. So like one is like when you're talking like what is your repressed instinct, I actually had a really lovely conversation when I was in Egypt with some colleagues. Actually, Misty was one of those people, about how we see people that are dominant in our repressed instinct. And so what came out of that is the people that were repressed in self-preservation, similar to what you said, find self-preservation's boring. And people that had the social instinct in the last position see social dominance as hypocritical. And then the people that had sexual instinct in the repressed position, which was me, we find people that have sexual instinct in the dominant position as inappropriate at times. And so I thought that was a really lovely conversation that came out of an organic place when we were in Egypt, an IA conference a couple years ago. But I also think like today, like just talking about our Enneagram and sexuality group, all of the information that we're going to share today really comes out of all of us sort of having conversations about ourselves and our clients and sort of how we see this show up, right? And so I want to be really, help you be aware of like, this is actually coming out of like 10 people's ability to sit down and collaborate and have conversation around how these influence and affect. And of course, as a social dominant, I'm always going to say like how important sort of the collective is in how we make our decisions and choices. And so I want to just say this comes out of that conversation. So this isn't just things that Sam and I came up with. These are things that came out of a conversation that all 10 of us had.
Perfect. Yeah, we got to cite our sources. So let's dive into repressed instinct and sex. So again, we have 2 episodes talking about dominant instinct and sex, episode 2 and 4. You can find those in my story highlights. That's really important. We've found that dominant instinct is really influential on sexuality. But what is a little bit, not top of mind, even as we're thinking about these things, is how repressed instinct would impact sexuality. And it does as well. So I'm going to start out by talking about self-preservation, repressed individuals, and sexuality. And then we'll move to social and sexual. So again, self-preservation blind or self-preservation repressed people, these are people who find that attentiveness to energy needs, attentiveness to the integrity of the body, the home, etc., as kind of a waste of time, or this is not a top priority for us. So what's missing in our sexual lives as self-preservation repressed people is a focus on safety. That's one of the number one things we figured out. It's not that, we don't want to feel safe, but that safety concerns aren't our top consideration when we're making decisions about partners or about the type of sex we're having. So at least, especially with younger self-preservation repressed people, we can get into risky situations, not exactly understand how we got there, and be maybe less aware of the consequences of those, emotional and physical consequences of those things. There's also a big lack of awareness of the physical comfort versus discomfort of the body. So what this means is you might be in a position, in intimacy that like actually hurts your body and you don't even notice, because your attention is at other things. If you're sexual dominant, your attention's on merging. If you're social dominant, your attention's on bonding and connecting. So there can be, sex to the point that it's hurting or that it's a problem or that, the body isn't happy, but we're not noticing. That's a big thing that's missing for self-preservation repressed people in sexuality. And there's this idea that like being physically comfortable would ruin the buzz of sexuality. I think this could be more for sexual dominance, but like it's about this like thing, this connection that sweeps you away. It's not about if your body feels good or not, which of course you can imagine the long-term problems that would create. There's definitely a lack of discernment, quite similar to the safety thing. There can be a lack of discernment around partner choice because it's just following the trail of chemistry or in the case of sexual dominant, or following where you feel the most bonded or where you feel needed or, socially connected for social dominant. And there's just a different barometer than folks would have who don't have this in their repressed position about, again, the emotional safety, physical safety. Still, there can be selectiveness with partners, but the selection isn't about the comfort, isn't about the best thing for me, the best thing for my body. It's about what feels good to these other 2 instincts. And let's see. Finally, I would say there's a lack of independence. And I want to clarify what I mean by that, because there can, especially as a 5, I'm very independent. So not in the traditional sense that you may be thinking, but when we're talking about sexuality, for a self-preservation repressed person, there's sometimes a lack of own sexual relationship with the self. So this idea that, masturbation would be less interesting or at least less exciting, like a sensual relationship with the own body, that would be lacking in a lot of cases because the sexuality is going to be really wrapped up with others. So I almost don't have a sexual relationship unless there's a person that I have it with. And you'll hear in later ones, that's not true for everyone. So there's a lack of understanding of the sexual needs, like outside of a relationship context. And I think that's most of the things I want to touch on. Lyndsey, go ahead and add anything you have.
One of the things that I notice, so like even if we just take the dynamics between relationships, right, is like that when someone has that self-preservation sort of in that repressed position, and let's say the other person is self-preservation dominant, or sometimes even the self-preservation's in the second position, it can sometimes create what I call a child-parent dynamic in the relationship, where one person is tending to or taking care of the other. You know, you mentioned sort of in the sexual realm, but it can be like I'm taking care of the finances and I'm taking care of the household. And so when you end up with that parent-child dynamic, it isn't really that great for sex, because nobody wants to have sex with their parent, or nobody wants to have sex with the child, right? And so really having that ability to like recognize the balance of power in relationships and really making sure that you have it balanced. And so that's one thing I would add. Otherwise, I agree with all the things that you said and I have observed with clients.
Perfect. So we probably only have 5 minutes for each, so we'll move right along. But the last thing I'll say about this is that when we were discussing this in our larger group, there's just a handful of each repressed of us, and it was myself, and I'm not going to name the other self-preservation repressed person or people, but we were the ones that were like, oh, here's a story about me being in a horrifying situation. Here's a story about me being in a really weird situation. And the rest of the group members are like, how did you let that happen? And we're sort of like, it wasn't a problem. Like, we weren't thinking about it. It wasn't terrifying at the time because we were attuned to all these other things. And so if you have, a history of getting into risky situations, of course, there's also a lot of other factors, trauma history, etc. Maybe you're self-preservation repressed. So that's the last thing I'll say. And let's move to social repressed. Neither of us is social repressed, so we're going to just both talk about this one. I'll say a few, and then Lyndsey, you can say a few things about social repressed. So what social repressed people are missing is an attentiveness to subtlety in sexual dynamics, meaning, subtle cues of attraction expressed towards them, subtle expressions of interest in sex. They can miss all of this. And they all, it's type dependent, but they tend to miss these more subtle things. They also, I'm trying to put this in a nice way, they have trouble recognizing that other people are different from themselves. Mm-hmm. And we see this in everyday relationships, everyday dynamics as well. With social repressed is like, they can't understand if they've hurt you, if they're not feeling hurt, that kind of thing. But in a sexual dynamic, they don't understand that the partner might want different things sexually than they do. They assume that the partner would want the same things as them. And if they don't seem to, the feeling would be like, well, I'll help them to see it my way. I'll help them to want the same things as me. Because like, what I want is what you should want, kind of thing. So considering what the other person feels or wants as separate from what you feel or want is going to be a little more foreign for social repressed. What do you have to add, Lyndsey?
Yeah, one of the things that I will add is just the like attunement and tending to the relationship component. And I think what can happen is sort of like out of sight, out of mind. Which, of course, we'll have some types that we see that more in, like, for instance, like 7s, but you can also see, like, with this social instinct in the repressed position that, like, they don't, like, do the tending, like, how are you doing? Like, well, we're fine. When I'm with you, we're great. When I'm not with you, we're fine, right? And especially when you have sort of that sexual instinct dominant in particular, like, they're going wherever the juice is, they're going wherever the excitement is, and they just kind of like assume like we're okay, even though we haven't had any contact or connection or bonding. Like, we'll just pick up where we left off. I think a really interesting thing for me, because like as a social dominant, this has been one of the things that is wounding to me with others that have social in that repressed position. And I was mentioning to you, Sam, like that I kind of had this aha moment when we were at the IA conference in San Francisco when I was on the social panel, because I always had thought like, well, maybe I'm not as important to you, or maybe you don't care about me, or, all of these types of things, because as a social dominant, right, you're kind of trying to figure out like, where do I stand with you? And it was really interesting to hear one of our colleagues, again, who I won't name out on here, say, oh my God, I had no idea that a social dominant would be feeling that way, because it's like we go where we are in the moment and then we pick up, even if it's years later, in the exact same spot, and we feel the same about you. And so just a very interesting dynamic of that, like tending to, and like, you know, when you don't have that tending to, your partner may not want to have sex with you, right? Depending on sort of how they, you know, do they need emotional connection first, or tending or bonding? And so I think that was just a really interesting perspective of sort of like what shows up with people that have that social in the last position.
Yeah, partners can feel really alienated. Even friends of social repressed people can feel really alienated. Like, why don't you seem to care about me, except for in these moments when we're together, when you've chosen to. And of course, that can be a barrier to intimacy. And I guess wrapping up social repressed with self-preservation dominant people who are social repressed, what we've seen is there's a lack of putting self out there for dating, for sex. It's like too much work. Why would I bother? You can get this with just any self-preservation dominant, but especially social repressed. And these are folks that you'll find who are like single really, really long time in their life, even though they're attractive and interesting and smart. They're just like, well, I'm not going to put out that energy, and I don't even know how to if I wanted to. So that's something with that stacking specifically. And then finally, I think there's a bit of a lack of holding space for partners with social repressed, like letting the partner be their own person who has their own sexuality that they can explore and unfold. Social repressed people aren't as adept at holding space for that. But we're probably out of time for that one. So let's go right to sexual blind, sexual repressed. Take it away, Lyndsey.
Yeah, I think I always find that the sexual repression one is harder to explain. Probably because it's my position, but also I think it's just like, you know, when we think of social and self-preservation, like there's concrete examples, and sometimes with this one there isn't. But one of the things that I have noticed in myself, as well as other people that have sexual instinct in the repressed position, is like the understanding of like what passion or excitement is, that playing with sexual energy, we sometimes like don't get it. And I know that I've shared the example from like my past relationship before my husband, where he's like, you're not passionate enough, you're not excited enough. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like pursuing all these things I'm passionate about, I got a career. And like really what he was talking to, and I think what a lot of people experience is it's like, no, the playing with sexual energy, the playing with the back and forth, that intensity that can happen and that flow in and out. And even when I talk about that, some of that still is like still somewhat foreign to me, but I think that this is a common complaint that partners have. And what I think is also really interesting with this is that what's interesting about sexual instinct is, even if it's in the repressed position, which I know we talked about before, but like it gets activated in the beginning of the relationship, and so they have this intensity and this playing with the sexual energy. But then after that first 9 months to year and a half, it kind of goes back to where it was, and there's like huge confusion. And I think what can happen is like for sexual instinct dominance, it's sort of like it happens once and then it's done. But and it was really interesting. Like I think I was hearing from, I'm like, isn't that how it is with everyone? But it's not. And sexual instinct dominance can come kind of in and out of that repulsion and that attraction. And so there's really this understanding of sort of what that is. I think another thing with sexual instinct to repress is sometimes that sexual instinct energy is really overwhelming and very intense. And so there can be this like enjoyment and pleasure of going into it, but then also be like, like I want more control. I don't like how that feels. And so sort of, this is going to be especially true for your people that are like social self-preservation, right? That kind of back and forth piece, but sort of that uncomfortability with that intensity and wanting to have more control of sort of the situation and what is happening. And then as I've mentioned too, is just like even like clothing, like I have been really intentional, like I'm intentionally wearing this bright pink top today to sort of be able to feel and be in more of that sexual energy or sexual instinct energy, because like it creates this like more aliveness in a way that I think other people have always gotten, but I haven't. And it's like I feel like it's a little bit more alive, and there's just a little bit more of a spark and a little bit more of a joy sort of in the clothing I wear. And it's like a lot of times what you will see, and this is very true for me until I started doing some more work on this instinct, is sexual instinct repressed people tend to wear more neutral color clothing. And will kind of stay away from color. And it was really interesting when this was pointed out, which is actually pointed out to me by my colleague Dace, who is part of our Enneagram and Sexuality group, in that like all my clothes were like really monotone. And it's really hard to feel like alive when you have sort of that type of clothing on. So those are some of the places that I see the sexual instinct repression come into play. I could talk more on that, but I realize we're short for time. What would you add, Sam?
And for people who are just joining later, we're going to go 5 minutes past this. We started 5 minutes late because of technology problems. A couple of things. One is with sexual instinct repressed or blind people, there's this lack of surrender that can come up, where in sexual repressed people feel intimidated or afraid of this like getting swept away feeling that sexual dominants like live for. And because of that, they'll resist surrendering to the sexual moment sometimes. And that can be a complaint of partners, is like, you're not like giving your whole self over. You're kind of holding back a bunch of yourself. And similarly, there can be like a lack of mystery, because mystery is more part of the sexual instinct, what that intrigue, that I don't know everything, what we're not saying. In a sexual repressed person, like sort of what's the point of that? And I'd rather have a stable and predictable, relationship, especially for self-preservation dominant. So there can be a little bit of a lack of mystery as well. And the final thing I want to say about this is, from a sexual dominant perspective, the few people I have dated who are sexual repressed, I have like weirdly no memory of what my dynamic was like with those people afterwards. Like looking back years later, I remember everything in vivid detail about all these other relationships. But with sexual repressed people, it's like a blank wall. And I don't know why that is, but I think it's because like I'm looking through this sexual dominant lens for sexual dominant feelings in my past, and they weren't there with those people. So to me, there's just like a blank memory, which is kind of funny.
I was like secretly laughing as you're saying that. I'm like, are we unmemorable?
No, it's not you. It's me.
I know.
It's just
but
weird.
I think it's just weird. Well, it makes sense to me, right? Like if the sexual instinct person is looking for that experience, and the sexual repressed person doesn't know how to do that, there would be sort of a lack of, right, in the actual sexual experience itself as well. I think, like, one of the things we wanted to talk about too is just like, why is this important? Like, why is it important to sort of understand this? And the reality is like, usually our stackings can shift and change, but they usually don't very much, right? Like it might be because like self-preservation might come to the top for Sam because she has to, right? But there's still going to be a tendency for it to sort of move back to the position that it's had. And so I haven't seen a whole lot of people fully shift their stackings, though I do believe it could happen and it could exist. But what I do see more often than not is things maybe at different points in time will kind of move in area of importance. But I think why it's so important for us to look at this is like, we're going to be in partnerships with, like even like my sharing of the social one, right? It's like not only is it important in the sexual relationships to sort of attune and tend to, but also like if people are important to you, like, don't I want to learn sort of like, how do I meet the need of the people in my life, right? Like, maybe it is kind of like I have to put a reminder on my phone to like reach out to people that are important to me, to tend to and to care for that relationship. And even in my romantic relationships, right? Because it's like, if I have that social, like, okay, I know that people feel more loved when I do that. Right. And even for me, right, that ability, like, so I have a partner who is self-preservation first and then has sexual second, right? Interestingly enough, we have the social dynamic happening there. But like, you know, like that desire and want for him to sort of like want some of that like excitement and energy and passion because he has that sexual instinct in that second position. And honestly, I feel like I learn a lot from him around that, and I do from people that have that, because it's like, it feels really good. So like I feel great, and like I feel excited and happy today in this pink top, which just seems like so strange, but it's like I am more alive, and it feels good to be more alive. But I can also do it in a way that feels safe to me, right? Because I can, you know, because of wanting to be in control, I can pick the pink top, and then people also experience that more aliveness in me. It's been interesting. I've gotten tons of comments today, like, oh my God, I love your top, and you seem so alive today, and all of these sorts of things. And like, all I did was put a different top on, but it feels so good to sort of have that energy out there. And so really it's about having more, you know, lasting, connective, loving relationships in our lives, and more like holistic experiences, which means that sometimes we have to tend to the one that's in the last position. Anything you'd want to add to that, Sam?
Yeah, just echoing what you said, and I'll do my example, which is like, you know, from my perspective, a less sexy example than yours. But for me, you know, as embarrassing as it is, learning in my 30s to take care of my environment really well and have like a beautiful, clear space and maintain my energy, and maybe like say no to sex when I'm tired or getting sick or something, that actually opens up so much space in my life and my relationship to connect better, even in the ways that I want to as a sexual dominant. So as we work on these things, like, our sexual relationships become more balanced and more easy and just kind of more in the flow. So that's, you know, that's another reason why this is so important. So we will be talking more in depth about blind and repressed instincts and sexuality at Sexy Chat, which is the third Friday of the month, every month. So it'll be October 20th this month, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Same time as this, but an hour, and it's a Zoom call. We have a small intimate group right now, and if you want to ask questions about your own blind instinct, how to figure it out, how it's impacting your relationship, and especially, you know, our expertise would have to do with your partner's blind and you're blind and how they're interacting, all that kinds of stuff. We'd love to talk with you, so send us a message and you'll get the Zoom link and you can come to Sexy Chat. Anything else, Lyndsey, you wanted to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, yeah, that also, like, that we're just, it's a donation based. So like, you know, come and pay what you can. It's not expected or anticipated that you have to. We want to make it, one of the things I know that was huge for me and huge for Sam is giving our time at a lower cost place so people could come as well. And then I think we already have our November Sexy First Friday topic as well, and it's going to be like, ask me anything. We want to know your questions, and so, you know, DM either Sam and I, and we'll put out stories where you can also kind of just type in your story, but like, we want to have you be able to have the space to ask more specific questions, and then we can bring them in here. We'll probably get to pick maybe 4 or 5 of them, and then kind of answer those questions directly for you. So anything that you've been dying to know about Enneagram, sexuality, and relationships, start messaging us and letting us know.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you later this month and next month.
Take care.
Bye, Lyndsey.
Bye.